will Boo Carter have a major impact this fall? And the reason I ask that is twofold. Number one, he's got his hands full on defense, right? We know he's a talented player, but still, that's a full-time job, needless to say. And number two, I've heard coaches say that they'll play players in different places, and they didn't because they didn't think it was best for the program. But it's a good way, especially now with the transfer portal, to keep people around. So we'll ask that question right back. Will Boo Carter have this fall? Caleb, what do you think?
I think he's going to have a Travis Hunter level impact. And the reason I say that is because they're literally running him full-time reps on both sides of the ball. He was getting reps in the secondary. He got multiple reps at wide receiver, and he's still their primary punt returner. And so I think they are going for a Travis Hunter look. Now, Tim Banks said after practice, quote, Boo understands he's a defensive back for us. The goal every year is to be the last man standing, so we're trying to do anything we can to give everybody the opportunity to grow. His role on offense will be dictated from coach, and at this point, he seems to be handling it really well. So they still seem to say at their roots, he is a defensive back, but I don't think this is anything. I don't think there's anything fake about this. Put it that way. I think he's going to be a elite player on both sides of the ball.
Okay, so let's ask, how Boo Carter be on offense? Let's say won't play, average, good, great. We'll give 4 choices to you, and we encourage you to vote right there. I don't want to be a doubting Thomas, but I still have my doubts. I still have my doubts that he will have a major impact for the Vols, just because Tennessee, for one, is going to be short Jermod McCoy, I believe, at the beginning of the season. Now, I know they don't play the same position, but still, you want some cohesiveness there. And I've just been around coaches too many times that have said this, that a guy can play both sides of the ball. Now, if you go back, there have been players, Caleb, you probably remember as well as I do, there have been players that have played on both sides for Tennessee. It just doesn't happen very often.
It does not. And I mean, historically, during the General Nealon years, everybody played both sides, honestly, back in those days. But you are right. It's not a regularly recurring thing to play both sides anymore. The one I can remember the most is 2003, Dave, when Mark Jones was primarily a receiver, but they definitely utilized him on defensive plays that year to make an impact.
They did.
Yeah, that's the one that stands out to me the most. One of the greatest defensive calls in the history of college football was John Chavis sending Mark Jones in on a blitz that he dialed up to whack Brock Berlin when Tennessee was playing Miami and forced an interception that Jabril Wilson came down with in the red zone when Miami was actually driving for a potential game-winning touchdown. So it has happened in the past. I think more so than anything, though, I think they're dead serious about using Boo Carter a lot. Remember, Squirrel White hit the transfer portal in the offseason. And we have to be honest about the fact that Squirrel White probably hit the transfer portal because Boo Carter was demanding that he be able to play more on offense. And David, am I crazy for thinking those two things were connected? And I was on that. I was believing that from the start. And I think even more so now. Yeah, Squirrel White, honestly, I think that's the biggest reason Squirrel White hit the portal.
Wow. That's a pretty big leap. If Squirrel White's scared of Boo Carter, a defensive back, then I don't know that I want him on my team.
It's not scared.
Go ahead.
What if Boo Carter basically made some demands that I demand to be the first team guy on offense, and the coaches said, all right, we're going to acquiesce to that even if Squirrel White's better, and Squirrel White saw that he wasn't going to get a fair shake to start. It's
okay. There are two things that scare me about that. The making demands thing, and we've just gone through the Ricky Gibson needs more money because, gosh, he's got a starving family, I'm sure, with what he was making before. That would be problematic to me. Mark Jones was a different situation. They went to him and asked him if he was willing to work on the defensive side. Now, he may have suggested it, but he was a very unassuming player. My concern with Boo Carter is that he might be upset if he's not playing enough on offense, that might affect his defensive play. I just this concerns me because players have so much more leverage. Used to be if a player came to you and said, "Hey, I would like to play on offense," you'd say, "Well, stick it. You're not going to play on offense. You're going to play on defense where you're most needed." But that is not necessarily the case anymore. You can transfer in a heartbeat, and there's no question that he could do that and find a ton of places to play. I think he's a special talent. I don't think he's like Mark Jones in that Mark was very unassuming. I think he was happy to play on both sides of the ball, but I don't think he demanded to play on both sides of the ball. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but it's not like demands maybe not to play both sides of the ball haven't been made, but they think about this. The 98 team, we know Peerless Price went to the coaches and said, "I want to play kick returner." Now, I know that's not offense or defense, but he said, and the coaches told him, "You're too valuable a receiver. We don't want it." And basically, Peerless Price accused them of not having the same faith in him that Florida State had in Peter Warwick at that point. And they bought it, and Peerless Price finished the second half of the year as a kick returner. We know he had a kickoff return for a touchdown against Alabama that year. So, I mean, I don't know if he demanded it per se, but given the fact that he was the only reliable wideout they had that year with T. Martin at quarterback, I'm pretty sure he had some leverage to say, "I want to play kickoff returner" at that point.
Yeah, I probably had quite a bit of leverage, but still, he would have had to transfer, sit out a year, and I'm sure Tennessee would have stuck it to him because if you remember, they had to give you a release to not have to pay for your school at another location, which I always thought was the craziest rule, wasn't it? That an amateur athlete would have to pay his own way at a school. That's a financial penalty. That never made any sense to me. Of all the bad rules the NCAA has put together, that may be the worst.
No, it's a terrible rule. It's an absolutely ridiculous rule. It was a stupid rule from the start. I totally agree with you. There was a level of, it exercised a level of power for the coaches. Let's call it what it is. We haven't talked about this. I thought the banning on NIL and the banning on like any sort of player's ability to maximize their market value, I thought that was more about the NCAA trying to line their own pockets. And maybe that is true, but honestly, looking back, it was more about giving the coaches all the power. And the coaches, the banning of paying players benefited coach. The banning of player power benefited coaches way more than it benefited everybody else. You saw out of whack salaries for head coaches, and you saw them be able to just arbitrarily block transfers to different schools. So no, I totally agree.
I want an update on our poll question, but then I'm going to reset it just a little bit. You don't have to change it because I want to hear people on the chat board and what you think about that. And I'm just going to ask this. If you were Josh Heupel, assuming you would keep Boo Carter, right? Assuming he doesn't leave because he's mad at you, would you play him on offense or him focus solely on defense? Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott. Okay, so I'll just ask you straight. I'm going to Coach Calhoun. Would you play Boo Carter on offense?
Yes. I saw him last year as a punt returner. Boo Carter is one of the deadliest players in football with the ball in his hands. I'd play him on offense before defense, honestly. I don't think this is 2008, 2009. I think a player of Boo Carter's caliber provides much more value on offense than defense. Dave, I'm going to give you a hot take. If Eric Berry committed to me today, I'd put him at wide receiver before I put him at safety. I just think he's too good.
Come on. he was one of the best safeties in the history of the modern era of football.
This day in football, what affects the game more, an elite safety or an elite wide receiver?
It's not a bad point. You know, he played quarterback in high school. He could have definitely handled it. He
Put it
was.
this, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Put it this way. It's now coming to baseball terms when you think about it. Babe Ruth in the 1920s, when the Yankees signed him, they decided to move him away from pitcher because they realized, as great of a pitcher as he was kind of better being every day in the lineup, wasn't he? And so
But that was a complete move. He didn't play both. He stopped pitching when he started.
That's what I'm. Yeah, he did both with Boston. But what I'm saying is that if you have to choose during the small ball era of baseball in the 19-teens, they felt pitching was more valuable. During the home run era of the 1920s, which Babe Ruth ushered in, they realized being an everyday player was more valuable. I think we're in an era of offense now where being an elite wide receiver is more valuable than being an elite defensive back. Tomorrow, you can get one player in their prime, and you can sign, let's say, Darrelle Revis or Randy Moss. Who are you signing?
Oh, I'm signing Randy Moss.
You want the receiver, don't you? I mean,
yeah, I can't turn down Randy Moss. Now, do you want to say Deion Sanders?
Yeah, I'll go Deion Sanders or Randy Moss.
I'd take Deion, actually, in that one. Who would you take?
I'd still take Randy Moss unless we're talking about putting Deion at wide receiver. Because sorry.
No, that's fine. David says I would play him 10 to 15 plays a game. That's about my limit. How much would you play him? He doesn't need to go out there and play 85 snaps on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, like he doesn't need to do what Travis Hunter did. I could give you 10 to 15 reps a game, but they need to be able to mix it in creatively. This is where Alex Golesh would be so valuable. He'd be creative on when to mix Boo Carter in.
Derek says, I hope Boo surprises Georgia early in the year. I hope we show little with him until that game. I can pretty much guarantee you that's going to be the plan. Or they'll run him a lot on offense against Syracuse to give Georgia something to prepare for. But I'm more along the lines of what Derek says, and that is he's not going to play a ton of offense until the Georgia game. Would you agree with that?
I would want to agree with that, and it should be that way. But you bring up the point of the Syracuse game to show him a new look, but then there's also the point of, I mean, I don't know why, but against lesser teams, Heupel loves running up the score. So he seems like he likes to show his cards against lesser teams more than anything else.
That's a great point. Ethan Davis catches a touchdown pass. Was it the first game of the season? And
yeah.
Then he was MIA for the rest of the year. So maybe that is what he'll do. But I don't think Georgia's going to see Boo Carter and be immediately fearful. Here's the other option. Let's be real here for a second. We'll talk receivers a little bit later in the program. But what slot receiver do they have now with Squirrel gone?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I mean, really, we know who the outside receivers are going to be. They're going to be Brazel and Mike Matthews, who, by the way, I hear Mike Matthews looks absolutely great in practice. Okay, so I know that Josh Heupel came out and said that he was injured last year. I thought that was a cover for a guy that wasn't ready to play. He's ready to play this year. And this is also year number 2. So it fits right in there that he would be able to, that he would have an impact in year number 2, because typically Josh Heupel's receivers and to some extent quarterbacks don't have an impact in year number 1. As far as Staley, maybe slot, I think that would be the way you would go. But from a talent perspective, there's no question that Boo Carter is more talented than Staley. No question.
None. And this is the point. Maybe I think they're going with Boo Carter because of just how great he is with the ball. Again, he can do some special things with the ball in his hands. I'm seeing the best player I ever saw at Tennessee, Dave, and I don't know who you would say, with the ball in his hands, not catching, route running, but once he had the ball in his hands, was Cordarrelle Patterson. I'm wondering if I feel like they think Boo Carter could be that.
Well, it doesn't quite have the size, but this from David. Who would you rather have, Rob Gronkowski or Aaron Donald?
Rob Gronkowski.
I'd rather have Aaron Donald. You said that so quick, I thought we were going to agree.
You're stuck in the 90s, man.